I want to start by saying I am not a vindictive person. Ask anyone who knows me. I let things go. I move on. I smile when I don't feel like smiling. I've been doing it my whole life, probably longer than I should have, if I'm being honest. My mom always said I was too gracious for my own good. She meant it as a compliment. I started to wonder, around the time all of this happened, whether it was actually a warning. But there is a limit to everything, and the day Melissa CC'd me on an email she meant to send to our boss, the day she handed me a loaded gun and pointed it at herself, something shifted inside me. A door closed quietly, and behind it was every decent instinct I'd ever had toward her. Let me back up. My name is Claire Bennett. This is my story, not a lesson I read somewhere, not someone else's mistake. I had been working at Callaway and Marsh, a mid-sized marketing firm, for 4 years when Melissa joined the team. I was 31, had clawed my way up from junior coordinator, and was finally sitting at the table I had always wanted a seat at. I had earned that seat through late nights, through skipping 2 vacations, through being the woman in the room who was always the most prepared and somehow still had to prove it twice as hard as anyone else. If you are a woman in a corporate environment, you know exactly what I mean, and I won't belabor the point. Melissa arrived polished. Perfect resume, perfect handshake, perfect laugh that she turned on and off like a faucet. She had this way of leaning forward when men spoke, like every word they said was the most fascinating thing she'd ever heard. Within 3 months, she had made herself the unofficial favorite of our department head, David, who had the people-reading ability of a decorative plant. I wasn't threatened by Melissa. I want to be clear about that. I was doing well. I had just been put in charge of the Hendricks account, our biggest client, a regional grocery chain that had just gone national, and I was building something real. Nights and weekends, decks that made David say, "This is exactly the direction we needed." I was 2 months out from a promotion that had essentially been promised to me in a one-on-one meeting that I thankfully followed up by email. That follow-up email? We'll come back to that. Melissa started small. Little things I couldn't quite prove. She'd ask me questions about my strategy for the Hendricks campaign in what sounded like genuine curiosity, girl talk almost, the kind of easy conversation that happens when 2 women are the only ones in the break room. And then 2 days later, those ideas would surface in her own presentations, slightly reworded, stripped of my name. I confronted her once, quietly, professionally. She looked me dead in the eyes and said, "I think we just think alike, honestly." Then she touched my arm and smiled. I smiled back. The door inside me cracked open a little for the first time. Then she went for the promotion. She didn't tell me. Of course she didn't. I found out from our mutual coworker, Priya, who had overheard David and Melissa having what was apparently a scheduled lunch, with wine, Priya noted, at noon on a Wednesday, where Melissa made a passionate case for why she should be moved into the senior strategist role, the role that had, in every practical sense, been verbally designated as mine. She cited contributions to the Hendricks account, her contributions, which were, as far as I could document, attending 2 of my presentations and sending a follow-up thank you note to the client that she had not told me about. I went home that night and I sat with it at my kitchen table with a glass of wine I actually deserved. I really sat with it. I thought, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe she genuinely worked harder than I noticed. Maybe this is just competition and I need to get tougher. I had been told my whole career to be tougher, to be less sensitive, to not take things personally. I was so tired of being told that. But I convinced myself to stay calm, stay professional, let my work speak. And then, 3 weeks later, on a Tuesday, at 9:47 in the morning, I got the email. It was from Melissa. It was addressed to David. I was in the CC field, and I will never know, not for certain, Whether she added me by accident, whether she fat-fingered my name instead of someone else's, or whether some panicked, last-functioning fragment of her conscience had hit the wrong button. What I know is that the email arrived in my inbox. The subject line was, "Strategist role, a few concerns." In it, Melissa told David that she had serious reservations about my readiness for the senior role. She cited my struggles with the Hendricks account, an account that was, at that exact moment, performing 34% above the client's stated benchmarks. She told him I had a pattern of defensiveness when challenged, which I believe refers to the one time I politely disagreed with her in a team meeting and used data to do it. And then, and this is the part that made my hands stop shaking and go very, very still, she told him that she had heard from people on the team that I had been taking credit for collaborative work. That last part, she had fabricated a source, or she was the source, describing herself in the third person. Either way, she had written a lie about me in a business email to my department head, and now, by the grace of God or pure stupidity, had sent it to me as well. I closed my laptop. I stood up from my desk. I walked to the bathroom, looked at myself in the mirror for a long moment, really looked, and made a decision about the kind of woman I was going to be for the next few weeks. Not louder, not angrier, quieter, more deliberate, more dangerous. I walked back to my desk, opened my laptop, and started building. I didn't respond to the email. Not that day, not ever. I just saved it, printed it, saved it in 3 separate folders, my work computer, my personal drive, my personal email, because I did not trust the universe to let me keep this gift without trying to take it back. Then I started gathering. I already had the follow-up email from David where he'd told me the senior role was the plan for me. I pulled every presentation I had ever made with its original file creation date and metadata intact. I pulled the Hendricks account performance data and built a clean 1-page summary of results week over week with my name attached to every deliverable. I went back through 6 months of Slack messages and found every instance of Melissa asking me detailed questions about my strategy, casual, friendly questions, the kind you don't think to screenshot at the time, cross-referenced with every presentation she made in the 2 weeks following those conversations. I was not loud about any of this. I was a woman in her apartment at night with a glass of water and a color-coded spreadsheet, calmly collecting kindling. I also quietly had a conversation with Priya, just a catch-up coffee. I let her talk, and Priya, who had been watching all of this with wide eyes of someone too sensible to get involved, confirmed that Melissa had never told me anything negative about me, and that Melissa had never asked her anything that could be described as a concern. Priya agreed to put that in writing, not aggressively, just a brief, factual email to HR if it came to that. The trigger was a team meeting 3 days later. Melissa, apparently not knowing I had read the email, or perhaps knowing and not caring, which would be its own special kind of arrogance, presented a revised strategy document for the Hendricks account Q3 phase. The strategy was mine. Not inspired by mine, not similar to mine. It was mine, with the formatting changed and 2 paragraphs rewritten in slightly different language. I know because I had written the original at 11 p.m. on a Wednesday while sitting cross-legged on my couch in an oversized sweatshirt eating cold pad thai, and I remembered every single word of it. I did not say anything in the meeting. I nodded. I took notes. David praised the document. Melissa glowed and looked at me just once, a quick, small look, and I smiled back at her so warmly that I could see her relax. That was the moment I felt most powerful, not when everything unraveled for her, that one moment when she thought she was safe. After the meeting, I requested a sit-down with our HR manager, a quiet, thorough woman named Sandra who I had always respected because she listened before she spoke, and she wrote everything down. I told her I had documentation I'd been sitting on and some concerns I wanted to share. My voice was level, my hands were still. I had rehearsed it, not because I was nervous, but because I wanted every word to land exactly where I placed it. I showed Sandra the email, Melissa's email, the one she'd sent to David and accidentally CC'd me on. I showed her the performance data on the Hendricks account. I showed her the original strategy document with the metadata confirming I had authored it, alongside the version Melissa had presented that morning. I showed her the follow-up email from David about the promotion. I walked her through the Slack messages, the pattern of Melissa extracting my thinking, then presenting it as her own to our leadership. And I gave Priya's written statement confirming that she had never made any complaint about me to Melissa or to anyone else. I then said, very calmly, that I was not there to burn anything down. I was there because I had been passed over for a promotion that had been promised to me in writing, because false statements had been made about me in a documented business email to my supervisor, and because my original work had been presented as someone else's in a client-facing context. I said I wanted those things formally addressed. I said that if they weren't, I would need to think about my next steps, and I delivered that last part the way you deliver something you've already decided, not as a threat, just as a fact. Sandra took every document. She thanked me for coming to her directly and told me she took this kind of thing seriously. She said she'd need a few days. In those few days, I later found out, she spoke to David, who had not noticed a single thing because David notices nothing outside of quarterly targets and his own reflection. She spoke to Melissa, who, according to Priya, who heard raised voices through a not very thick wall, did not take the conversation gracefully. Sandra also pulled the internal file history herself and confirmed what I had handed her with the firm's own records. On day 5, David called me into his office and offered me the senior strategist role. He spoke about my performance on the Hendricks account and said the timing was right. He did not mention Melissa. He did not apologize for any of the previous weeks. He smiled his comfortable, oblivious smile and extended his hand. I shook it, thanked him professionally, and walked back to my desk with my shoulders back. Melissa was not fired. I want to be honest about that because I'm not here to exaggerate for drama. She was placed on a performance improvement plan, removed from the Hendricks account, and reassigned to a smaller project portfolio on a different team. She resigned 6 weeks later. I heard through the grapevine that she landed somewhere else at a smaller firm. I genuinely hope she's doing better. I mean that. I also genuinely hope she thinks about that email every single day. What I think about now when I look back on all of it is not the promotion or the title or the moment David said my name in the right context for once. What I think about is standing in that bathroom, looking at myself in the mirror and making a quiet decision. No crying in the parking lot, no venting in the group chat, no confrontation in the hallway that she could spin into a story about me being emotional or difficult, or the word women in offices fear most, aggressive. Just silence, and a folder, and patience. Because there is a version of me that would have sent a furious reply to that email the second I read it. That version of me would have gotten nothing. Less than nothing. She would have handed Melissa exactly the narrative Melissa was trying to build. Instead, I waited. I organized. I documented. And when I walked into Sandra's office, I wasn't a woman complaining about a coworker. I was a woman presenting evidence. That's the thing they don't tell you when they say, be the bigger person. Being the bigger person doesn't mean absorbing the hit and moving on. Sometimes it means being so precise, so prepared, and utterly calm that the other person's bad behavior dismantles itself in front of the people that matter. I got the promotion. I kept the account. I still make my pad thai cold sometimes. And I keep that folder backed up in 3 places. Always. Old habits.